The Kauffler Gallery is proud to present the world premiere of a heart-wrenching and fascinating exhibition, The Synagogue at Babin Yar, Turning the Nightmares of Evil into a Shared Dream of Good. Opening on the eve of Yom HaShoah, April 17th, and running until November, the multidisciplinary exhibition tells the bittersweet story of the Babin Yar Synagogue, which stands on the grounds of the first large-scale massacre of the Holocaust in 1941. Experience the full historical, political, artistic, and spiritual context of this incredible monument for the first time. The exhibition is free of charge. To learn more, visit kaufflerarts.org.
This is Bonjour Chai, the Defenders of the Faith edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltwovi in Toronto and Zac Kauffman in Toronto. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we ponder the post-celebration future of Israel. Is this a coming cataclysm or not? Plus, King Charles is set to have his coronation soon. How should Canadian Jews consider this? All this and more coming up. Phoebe, how's it going?
All right. How about you, Avi? What's new?
Doing all right. We're actually recording this on Yom HaAtzmaut. It feels pretty celebratory. Feels like a great day. We're about to have a big rally in the city to, get everybody together. I'm going to march with my kid. And it's sunny. It's nice. It's good. We're going to have a beautiful Yom HaAtzmaut celebration. And we have Zac with us as a guest host today.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. How are you doing, Zac?
I am peachy keen.
Are you about to march for Yom HaAtzmaut?
And there's not a march in Toronto.
I was going to say, if there was, it's not going through Roncesvalles. But
I'd be marching on the spot. But there is one at the end of May. There's the Walk for Israel. And the CGN will have a booth. And everyone is welcome to come out to it.
Beautiful. We have another piece of news also, though, that on May 7th, we will be doing a Bonjour Chai live in Montreal. I will be live doing a live recording at the Shar Shemaim congregation as part of their Day of Learning on May 7th. All details are on the Shar Shemaim website. You should check it out, sharhashemaim.org. I will be interviewing some live people, and it'll be hopefully a great show. So check that out and come see me on May 7th.
Woo.
I feel like this come down of after Yom HaAtzmaut is going to, we've all been sort of avoiding this question for the past few weeks, ever since, Bibi realized that we have to table this whole conversation. And it was like, well, let's move until after the 75th birthday of Israel. Let's keep everything fun and light for the celebrations. But everybody knows that there's this inevitable thing that's happening. It almost feels like, the parents that stay together for the bar mitzvah. But everybody knows that after the bar mitzvah, they're like, we're going to start seeing family lawyers and mediators.
Is this something that happens? I'm sorry, I've never heard of parents staying together for the bar mitzvah. I've heard of till the kids grow up.
The something.
Okay.
If you know that there's an inevitable simcha, I'm guessing that there are people that stay together and aren't going to get divorced 6 months before.
You're teaching me so much about the religious world.
This isn't a religious thing.
I'm just kidding. I'm just being silly. Yes. But yes, it does seem like that. I see the analogy. That does makes sense. So what is going to happen next? Zac, predict the future, please, for us. What's happening for Israel? Give us the next 50 years of Israel. Go. Okay,
so tomorrow, the guy in the shuk is going to sell a falafel.
Mm-hmm.
Only one.
One ball or one sandwich?
Firstly, I would quibble with Avi's framing of Yom HaAtzmaut. I think something that's been interesting has been all of the protests around Yom HaAtzmaut, and I don't think the proverbial bar mitzvah has been so smooth. I think there's been a lot of people sort of struggling with how to celebrate the national day when people aren't feeling so great about it. And I think that it's not dissimilar to any other national birthday like Canada Day or 4th of July, where people are like, oh, we want to have all this pride about all the great things about our country. And then there are other people who are like, well, our country's done all these really messed up things. How do we have a big celebration about it?
I think that fits into the analogy. When you do stay together for the kids know, and the kids, feel that tension, and it gets let out some way.
So I want to push this analogy further. What does divorce look like in this analogy? What would be the cataclysm? What do you imagine, Avi? What is your...
It's a good question because I think that the assumption, according to everybody, is that the mediation is absolutely going to work. Right, we're going to go to family, therapy, and everything's going to be better, and we're going to make this work. But the smart people think about all the possible options, and I don't know what the possible options are. I just know all of the things that were happening at the beginning of Zionism, right? The split between the religious and the secular, the split between the liberal and the conservative, the idea that what is this Zionist project about, that has been simmering, right? That it's not unified, that we think that we're all together, right? The biggest mistake I think that I see from people that are trying to make it seem like it's good is they're like, people are saying, and I saw this from Federation in Montreal, they're like, oh, but the beautiful thing is that there is achdut, right? That there is unity and that we're all together and we're unified in this project, right? And we're not. We're pointing out that when you have a majority that is so slim, there is a huge plurality of people, and that's a significant minority that doesn't actually believe what's going on, and that there is huge rifts in the thought process and in the day-to-day living of these people. So is it about the Haredi, religious and the secular? Yes. Is it about people who are not religious but are willing to let religious people, rule things in exchange for security and safety? For sure. Are there people that are on the other side that say that my safety comes at the expense of other people and that that's not good on the world stage and that's not good for my personal ethics? Yeah. So all of these things, I don't know how that split comes about, but I do know that there are some irreconcilable differences at this point, and people are finally pointing them out.
So can I just do a little devil's advocate, as it were, of that the marriage is tranquil, actually?
Sure.
Well, not quite tranquil, but I come at this. Okay, I come at this as an American who remembers very well before the Trump era, but certainly the Trump era, and I remember that note of panic in everyone's voice of like, oh, that's it, America's kaput, it's done, Americans are going to leave the country, it's all done, everything's over, look, we have this, populist right-wing clown as our president, everything's over, America had its day, it's over. And now it's just that there's a different president, and things go along, and people still hate each other who hated each other before, maybe they hate each other more, maybe not, but people live where they live. They stay if they're going to stay. With Israel, there's always been a certain number of Israelis unhappy with living in Israel, or just happier living somewhere else for whatever reason, who do move away. So, it's not... I feel like unless you really saw a mass exodus of especially secular Israelis, I'm not sure that you can really say that anything's going to have changed that profoundly. It just seems like tranquility is kind of a pattern in, well, really in all societies to some extent, except for tranquil Canada, maybe. But I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm not convinced that seeing this as like an existential threat as versus crummy politics for a time is necessary. But I am not a legal scholar. I am not Israeli. And all I know about is falafel. So it's going to be on you, Zac, I think, to explain this all.
Just so everyone knows, I also am not a legal scholar.
What?
Although I am...
You play one on TV.
Before I worked at CJN, I was living in Israel for 3 years. I was originally in Tel Aviv, and then I moved to Jerusalem when I could not stand Tel Aviv any longer. No offense to some of my beloveds in Tel Aviv. Something that I was thinking about in this discussion was that I think both Israel and Jews in general are at this moment of inflection and reflection for a little bit of the same reasons of, I think, a lot of the internal tensions and divisions that once existed that were papered over because of external threats, and that there was sort of an internal, perhaps artificial internal cohesion because of external threats. As Israel has gotten stronger and made peace with its immediate neighbors, and as most of the important stakeholders have seem to have stopped caring as much about the Palestinians, and their bigger fear is Iran, and just Israel has one of the strongest armies in the world, and this booming tech sector and whatever. The fear of external threats, in some sense, is much less than it was before, and I think it has forced/allowed Israel to see all these internal rifts that they sort of weren't able to examine as much before, and the same with Jews in general. There was a time when the ghetto walls forced. Made us not be able to see our differences, and as anti-Semitism has become less, and as there's been less existential threat to Jews, I think we are also seeing the internal rifts much more clearly than we ever did before.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I'm wondering though, about just this idea of rifts, because and also about Canada Day as kind of a day of celebration for some, a day of reckoning for others. And just, I'm wondering about the danger of looking at the existence of internal rifts in Israel as somehow fatal to Israel in a way that I don't think people generally see the internal rifts of, for example, Canada. Does that make any sense? I mean,
it doesn't, it doesn't track for me that the internal rifts in Israel, are deadly to Israel. Mm-hmm. Because when I think about other states, you think about Turkey, for instance, that used to be very secular, then a hardline religious government came in. Now it's a lot more religious. All the Turks didn't leave Turkey. It's just now people who are secular have to live under much stronger religious law. And I can imagine that happening in Israel, where if the religious parties continue to have power, continue to gain in power, maybe we will have a system where we'll have stadiums in Israel that are divided by gender segregated,
you may not even have games anymore. Right? What's this idea of going to stadiums that are going to be gender segregated? We're not going to have,
is there no fun in ultra-Orthodox Israel? Is there only the Bible contest?
I think that the stereotypical reason why Israel was always able to overcome these internal differences was the proverbial, sitting around at the coffee shop yelling at the people that you disagreed with, and that people actually were face-to-face with the people that they knew. And that was a unique part of Israeli society, that people disagreed with their neighbors, but there was all of this talk was always happening. And I actually feel like that has stopped, that there are people, I firmly believe that it's very hard to hate somebody that you're face to face with, right? When you see somebody and they're against an entire religious way of thinking, female rabbis or Hasidim or whatever it is, go meet them, sit down with them, talk to them, realize that they're people and that they have opinions and views and all of that. That for some reason ceases to be happening, and that the Haredi population, for example, on one side, doesn't care anymore that the secular parts of Israel don't actually want to live a religious lifestyle, right? They're saying, look, we have enough power, we're going to get our way, and it's not just that we're going to get our way for us, we want to get our way for everybody.
Is this a demographic question to any extent? Because I'm just thinking about
I think very much so.
Isn't that just
for sure
going to be I'm looking long term for Israel. I know a lot of secular Israelis, they often have more children than their secular Jewish equivalents in North America. They do not have as many children as a Haredi family probably would. Is this just going to kind of sort itself out in numbers? I believe so. On the other hand, democracy is a democracy, and people are always changing, and you can always have new political movements. I think in terms of what Avi said, I think looking back, there was a time when obviously Israel was much more homogenous, when
in the first 20 years, it was the original stereotypical, mostly Ashkenaz, mostly European, highly secular, and in a mostly homogenous society. There are fewer rifts, and obviously the demographics are very, very different now with the Mizrahi and non-Ashkenazi populations and African populations. And just to say, like, we haven't even mentioned Palestinian citizens of Israel, let alone Palestinian non-citizens.
So I was going to say that that's the other piece.
That's a whole other thing we're not talking about.
But we should, that there are demographic threats on multiple fronts.
I wouldn't say it's why is that threat?
I wouldn't say threats. I wouldn't say threats either. I would say that there's just demographic realities, and that I guess I was almost saying
I have
that,
no
like,
problem with it. Yes,
but yeah, I guess I was just, when I was talking about demographics, I almost was assuming an audience familiar with the demographic discussions that do include the non-Jewish population, and that's almost where the demographic discussion. When you say Israel and demographics, I think that's where probably our listeners are imagining people are talking about. But I'm saying, like, it might just be that there is not going to be long-term that much of a demand for a secular Jewish state in numbers.
Except for the fact that the diaspora world is still going to want a secularized Jewish state, because that's a big part of the Zionist project for people that aren't living in Israel, especially non-Orthodox people. They have this idea of, like, well, Israel's the safety net, in that if anything ever goes really haywire in America or in Brazil or in, wherever, that the idea is that, well, at least I know I'll always have that. But then if you know that your wedding might not be recognized and that your own Jewishness might not be recognized, then that's a problem. And
you may not be allowed to come.
Exactly. Then your safety net is gone.
If your mother is not Jewish, if your Jewish parent was your father and they were to change the law of return so that it's a religious Jewish standard, and, and
there's a lot of diaspora Jews that want to have their bar mitzvah or their kids' bat mitzvah in Israel at the Kotel, and they don't want the Haredi, monopoly on a sacred site. And maybe they're right, maybe they're not. I don't know. That goes back to our Daniel Hartman argument of, like, well, if you have a say, but at some point, you have to leave your hands off and let other people, if you're not living there. But in that sense, yes, I think that is their demand going to go away? Possibly, but who's right? Even when you get to that point, even when you go and say that there's a religious right, I'm Orthodox, or at least I consider myself Orthodox, and there are many people that would not consider me Orthodox. They consider me an absolute heretic, right? Why should that person have a monopoly on what it means to have a religious state and not other religious people that are living in that state?
Well, what if it was democracy? Like, there's more of them than you.
Well, if we're going to open it up to a democracy, and this is where the Haredim want to use democracy in one side to say, well, there's more of us, but they're willing to deny citizenship to Israeli Arabs or to Arabs in general because they're afraid of democracy overtaking their Jewish religious state. You don't get it both ways.
Well, one Haredi person, one vote. That's what I say.
Oh my God. Yeah, I don't know. I do think that we are at a different point than we have been before. I do think that there is some inflection point. I'm not going to predict the future as to what that's going to look like and how it's going to shake out. But I do think that something about what's happening now is fundamentally different. And even if you are right that the demography is going to win and is going to make the democracy into what it wants and not looking at the other side, that is something cataclysmic for the idea of Zionism, right? That Zionism actually was never about religion. In fact, it was about often was very much thought of as a secular project, and religious Zionism was its own thing. And here we see a world that is often not taking into consideration the entire scope of what religion actually looks like and what religion means, even within Orthodoxy. That we have this very narrow slice of Haredi and religious Zionist life that is going to cast a shadow on the rest of the world, because this is the way that they want things to be done. I do think that on that part there is something there, and I think that there is a reckoning about at the totally secular level Israel about this question of security versus, what are the other factors versus our space on the world stage, right? I think that's the question that Israel is facing, is how much are we willing to sacrifice our standing in Western civilization and society in exchange for saying that this is what we need to do to feel safe.
Well, one question about that, about the international standing and Western society, is if there's a right-wing, populist, nostalgic, sort of backlash general mood in the West, is Israel not just of a piece with that? There are a lot of countries going in that direction, and a lot of,
Sure.
So in a way, isn't this Israel just kind of being like other nations?
Yeah, I think that there's a cataclysmic thing that is happening in America also, and I think that we're in the midst of it. It's not as quick, and we're realizing that these shifts don't happen as radically as we think that they do. Right? Remember, I always like to remind people that 50 years of history often gets reduced to one chapter in a history textbook. Right, even very important 50 years of history, right? And you're living through these things one day at a time. In 500 years, we will see the rise of the Tea Party and the ultimate shift into whatever America is going to become, as
or Europe,
like I said,
or Hungary.
I'm just giving that as one example, right?
And I think that's also just it's like an interesting thing when you're actually in Israel, when you see, and Europe, when you walk around and you see like, oh, that's a Ottoman this, and that's a Byzantine this, and that's a Mamluk period this, and you see all of these civilizations that have come and gone and had inflection points and whatever, and the place still is here today. And like you said, we are only one moment in history, and we sometimes can't imagine how things will progress, but they still progress.
Well, speaking about moments in history, let's talk about the monarchy right after we hear from our sponsors.
UJA's Walk with Israel is happening this Victoria Day, Monday, May 22nd. Join thousands of community members for the world's largest Israel Solidarity Walk, followed by an epic Israeli-themed beach party to celebrate Israel's 75th birthday. Get all the details by visiting walkwithisrael.com. This is our moment to unite as one strong and proud Jewish community. Religious and secular, left and right, Jews and allies. Everyone belongs at the Walk with Israel. Register before May 19th, and if you use the promo code CJN, you can save 10% on all Walk Bundle packages. To register, visit walkwithisrael.com.
So there is a coronation coming up soon. It's reminded us in Canada that we have a monarchy. We have a monarch. They're on our paper money. They're on our coins. They're elsewhere. We have a governor general. Zac, I know that you think about these things. You follow them. Maybe. Zac, can you tell us what's happening, and we can get into why we should care about this?
I don't follow it terribly closely, but I do think thinking about the monarchy is an interesting lens of other trends. I'm curious, you, Avi, as Canadian, but also as like a religious person, how you feel about the idea of having a king. If you met a king, would you bow? But also just like in a Jewish sense, does it feel icky to you? And Phoebe, I'm curious from you to find out, like, as American, is it weird to you that we have a monarch? As you chew over those questions, I will just say, put my cards on the table and say, I actually think it's sort of nice. I'm not a huge monarchist, but I have to say that living in Israel where there was a prime minister and a president, I sort of liked the system where there was a figurehead of state that was above politics, that was beyond politics, that could sort of embody supposedly our national ideals and could go around, kissing babies and cutting ribbons, who represents the national polity in more of a way. And I think that's sort of something nice about having a national figurehead like a monarch that doesn't have any power. Throwing to you two, curious how you guys feel about monarchy in general.
I mean, do I think it's weird? It's certainly been an adjustment, but I tend to think similarly to you that it's sort of, it it serves a purpose in a society. It kind of deflects some of the, like it makes it so that the president or head of state, whoever it is, prime minister, is not everything. It divides things up in a way, like you say, that can be kind of helpful. But I will say that reading Prince Harry's memoir did not really paint a very upbeat picture of the royal family, and it seems like it's a kind of terrible thing for them. Like they're both kind of the worst of privilege, but also kind of in this prison by it. It doesn't seem like it's a good thing for the actual people who are royals, or necessarily for society, to have this idea of, like, if you want to have a society where everybody thinks that anybody could be anything one day, and then to have this set of people who were born in their roles, I don't know that quite adds up. Like, I can see there's some tensions there.
Why do you think why do you think your fellow countrymen and women are so transfixed, interested in our monarch? Not to get all grabby, but
why do I think Americans? Well, I think Americans don't have this, right? We only have celebrities, and it always feels like a kind of, like, it's almost royal. So then you have famously, like, the princess phase that little children, mainly little girls, go through, of like wanting to be a princess, all these Disney movies and so forth. I think there's this kind of mystique around royalty that comes with precisely not having royals in your own front page news. Like, you don't, like, this just seems like something from another time with royals and castles and so forth. I don't know how different it is in Canada, whether royalty is less romanticized because precisely you people have royals.
They don't ever show up, right? I think you're right in that America has lived without a monarch for so long and forgot why they expelled it, the royalty from their land, right? They have been recently reminded by Hamilton, right? You'll be back, right? That's, this moment where America, as you say, realizes, oh, celebrities are fun and royals are nothing more than just, celebrities that happen to run things. Technically, even though they don't actually run things. I think, like most Canadians, completely blasé about the monarchy. I'm aware that it's there. I have no problem, doing the prayer for the state and including, the king or the queen, or including it with constituted officers of the land and all of that. But I don't think about it all that much. And I think that the role for a titular monarchy, right, as opposed to something where the monarch actually has real power, has gone, right? I don't think that there's a role for it anymore. I have no problem with kings. I have no problem with benevolent dictatorships if they actually are benevolent. I think that, for thousands of years as Jews, we have lived under monarchs. We have lived under kings, and we have no problem. When we go and we talk about God as the King of Kings, there's an assumption that there are other kings in the world. That's fine. I have no problem thinking about that. I just have a problem with these idea of like a figurehead, right? I think it's great. So why are we praising this person and having wonderful things for this person when they actually have no power, when at the end of the day, they can't overrule anything in their country? There is no real power.
No, but I think in Trump years, there would be a bunch of nice library openings, but you wouldn't want to invite Donald Trump because he represents all these things that you disagree with, and the Republicans, wouldn't want to invite Joe Biden to their stuff. So I think it's sort of nice to have someone.
But I think that until recently, that actually was the case, that even if you strongly disagreed with the prime minister and their party, or the president and their party, you still saw them as the leader of the country, and you invited them to, or you accepted an invitation to the White House or to Parliament for whatever it was that you were being invited for, and that was a good thing, and that that was there. I think that has only changed relatively recently, and that in past times when there were kings that were not so benevolent, you didn't have anything to do with them, right? You were suffering from whatever policies they had in place, but you weren't really connected to the king in that way. And now we have this thing that, yes, it's universal. Yes, they represent, but do they really, right? How often are they there is the king going to Davos? Is the king going to, the UN? The king is not going to these places, right? The real change, the real work of the world is happening outside of the monarchy.
So I'm going to give a kind of, again, devil's advocate, sort of anti-monarchy point, which is really like my only strong political view about the monarchy, which is that when and this is specific to Charles and Harry, perhaps a little bit, but really all of the more recent sort of supposedly enlightened British royals, or ex-royals in Harry's case, sort of, when they declare themselves like these sort of ambassadors for environmentalism, and they make environmentalism their cause, and they, everybody should really live more simply and not waste so much. And they have like 50 gazillion castles, jets, all of this. And I feel like there's something about people who are royal becoming the kind of like environmental scolds, even if they're right.
Every year when you go to that you go to Davos, Phoebe, I know that you make the same argument when you're there. That there's all these
definitely.
Yeah.
It's her and Greta. But does that feel different than just like rich people?
So maybe it's not different from all rich people, but I'm saying that that is one area where I feel like this idea that you're supposed to look to royals as, because it's just so cartoonish. I don't know. It's about, I'm talking about image to some extent, but that's one area where I'm not persuaded by royalty.
I do find it strange when we have an election here that we have to get permission from, like, to dissolve parliament. We get permission from
but the permission is never not granted. That's where I say the entirety
I know, but it's still a weird appendage.
Yeah, so that's why I think it's vestigial. It's okay, like, as long as it doesn't really affect me, but if it went away, it would not bother me in the least.
Well, here's a question. Is having this connection to royalty what makes Canada not the U.S. to some extent?
No, that and the multi-party system and
the border.
Well, and the weather to some extent. I don't know. I feel like the royal versus not on some level is like an important distinction between Canada and the U.S. Not the only distinction, certainly, but there's also poutine or whatever. But yeah.
Oh, can I also bring up something else that I read recently that did you guys see that Charles we're changing his title, and that he used to be known as, here he will no longer be known as Defender of the Faith, and we are changing his title.
Aren't there like 6 titles and that's part of it?
What's he now going to be called?
He's now like Grand Mugwump, King of the Seven Kingdoms. His mother, Queen Elizabeth, was known as Elizabeth II, by grace of God of the United Kingdom, Canada, and her other realms and territories, Queen, Head of the Commonwealth, Defender of the Faith. Charles will be known as Charles III, by grace of God, King of Canada, and his other realms and territories, Head of the Commonwealth.
So they're just dropping the Defender of the Faith.
Correct.
Is there a reason for this?
Yeah, people don't like it.
Well, the Haredim have clearly, they are the defenders of the faith. And
Avi, maybe you have feelings about this. I just am like lost in the words, the sheer number of words. He could have just gone with Chucky. I'm Chucky now.
Here's Chucky.
Defender of the faiths. Right, defender of all faiths, defender of the faith in the Canadian project or the monarchy, the faith in monarchy being something. Right. What's interesting is that there's incredibly Christian, like there's an assumption that when it says defender of the faith, it automatically is going to assume Christianity without even saying it.
Well, it's his faith. It's the Anglican faith.
Right. It's not just Christianity.
Like he's the head of the church.
Yeah, the Church of England.
I should ask my Anglican friends what they feel about the monarchy and the dropping of this, because I'm like, okay, great. I know that we live in a non-Jewish state, and that's okay. And that goes back to our earlier discussion about, okay, whatever. Canada is not Israel, and nobody actually cares about faith. And I mean, people do, but as a country.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is something I had wondered about. If Canada seems a little bit more officially Christian sometimes than the U.S., whether that does relate to this Church of England connection and the being sort of still connected in that way to monarchy.
Phoebe, I think one thing to think about on the topic is the idea that, like, one defining characteristic of Canada is it's like the compromise between two cultures, and it's not only the Anglican culture, but you also have Quebec, which has been traditionally like fiercely anti-monarchist and Catholic, and so at once there is all of there's the connection to the Church of England, but it's also built on this grand compromise between two cultures and two faiths.
But Christian faith. So on that level, defender, not defender of the faith. Well, he's done defending. Maybe Charles just doesn't want to defend it. Maybe he's like, let the faith sort itself out.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting that Canadians they're like, well, we're cool with, we're going to keep the king thing, you know, we're okay with the monarchy, but this defender of the faith thing goes a little bit too far.
Again, is this the woke mob? Has the woke mob come for King Charles?
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
Zach, start us off. What's your nachas?
In the vein of Yom Ha'atzmaut, on the Promise podcast, Noah Ephron had a wonderful, inspiring, uplifting opening monologue. It felt like Howl by Allen Ginsberg, but like about Israel.
First, there was the Zemer Ivri, and it was beautiful. And Yitzhak Klepter and Arik Einstein said, "Let there be rock and roll," and there was rock and roll, and it was good. And the streets of the central bus station filled with cassettes of music from Yemen and Morocco and Tunisia and Egypt, and it was good. And there were songs of protest, and they were good. And Corinne Al sang herself out of the closet, and it was good. And Yuda Poliker and Yaakov Gilad said, "Now let us sing about the Shoah and what it has done to us," and it was good. And Dudu Tassa found a box of music by his grandfather and great-uncle from Iraq, Daoud and Salih al-Kuwaiti, and he made their music, and it was good. And Shuli Rand, in the black, high-crowned, brimmed hat of the ultra-Orthodox, made a record of love songs to God, and it was good. And the land filled with song, and it was good. People dreamed that this place would be a factory of Jewish cultures that our grandparents' grandparents could never have imagined, and that is what it is. And people dreamed that this would be a place where old Jewish culture and new Jewish culture would blur one into the other, where you could hear Aramaic on the morning show on the radio, where trans singers would sing traditional songs, where books of poems would come out in Ladino, where women would be ordained as rabbis, including Orthodox rabbis, and where each year new floats would need to be added to the Pride Parade for new groups of queer religious Jews.
So, big plug, Noah Ephron and his co-hosts podcast, the Promise podcast from TLV1. Really lovely, inspiring episode. And that is my nachas.
Phoebe, what's your nachas this week?
Thanks, Avi. My nachas is going to have to be those cherry blossoms in Toronto. They're in High Park and elsewhere. They're not only in Toronto, they're cherry blossom trees.
We have them in our neighborhood also. Westmount is famous for its cherry blossoms.
It's a lovely time, and it arrives a little later in Canada than many other parts of the world, so that's why this is of relevance to Canadian listeners. So year after year, during COVID, there was all this stuff in High Park in Toronto where you couldn't go look at cherry blossoms, or you couldn't get too close to them, or it was all kind of gated off, and there was this, like, for some reason, the government was very convinced that you could get COVID from a cherry blossom when, meanwhile, you could like eat in a restaurant or whatever. It didn't really make sense. But the point is that, so finally, there's this kind of like post-COVID-ish era, whatever that means, where you can freely look at all the cherry blossoms you want. Unfortunately, the weather has been kind of horrible for it, but we did go out in the rain. At one point, I actually jogged in snow and saw them because that's the kind of weather it's been. But yeah, the cherry blossoms, even in gray weather, are extremely beautiful. And I highly recommend going to look at cherry blossoms. Really fun.
100%. Yes.
What about you, Avi?
I am going to recommend a short story that came across my radar recently. I don't remember who passed it along to me. The Last Question by Isaac Asimov, a good Jewish boy. It is one of the greatest science fiction short stories that I have read in a long time. It's about AI, it's about environmentalism, it's about all of these things. It was written way before these things were part of our daily life, and I thought that it was brilliant in its compactness and how it worked almost like a biblical story in the sense of like having intertextuality, having things standing in for other things, and moral lessons being learned from a great short story. It is available readily online. Go check it out. The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. Excellent. All right. Zac, this was amazing. You should come back sometime.
Thank you very much. I'd love to.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week ending April 29th, Shabbat Parashat Acharimot Kiddoshim. The show is produced and edited by Zac Kauffman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love if you would tell a friend about Bonjour Chai. It is one of the best ways that we get our new listeners. As always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. I'm Avi Feingold.
I'm Phoebe Maltz-Bovey.
And I'm Zac Kauffman. Thanks for listening.